I recently made a video talking about the commonly held view that the Bakerloo line of the London Underground is, to put it frankly, not very good. The comments section was interesting. Actually, it seemed to me that there were more people speaking fondly of the Bakerloo line than complaining about it. Now that might be because my audience likes old trains and stations, I know I do, but it set me thinking. What actually is the most hated line on the Underground? Well, as it turns out, there is a YouGov poll about this from last year. Actually, I have encountered this particular poll before. I made a video in which I referred to it when I talked about whether the Elizabeth line counts as a tube line. The poll was released in December 2024 and was conducted among Londoners, so let's look at the results. The most popular lines, opinion-wise, weren't even tube lines. The most beloved was the Elizabeth line, as I hinted earlier. Then it was the Overground, which not only isn't a tube line, but is these days a collection of 6 different lines. Next came the Docklands Light Railway, again not a tube line, and is in fact light rail. I suppose you could argue that this is also more than one line, but it's not officially recognised as such. Those are the only 3 non-tube lines included in the poll, so no love for the trams, I guess. So, on to the actual tube lines. There are 11, thus depriving us of the opportunity for a top 10 countdown. Number 11, the most liked and least hated, is the Jubilee line. This is interesting to me because it's actually the 3rd busiest line. I tend to avoid it in central London for that very reason. It's the newest line, kind of, with the section from Green Park to Stratford being only 25 years old at the time of writing this video. The architecture on the new section is pretty spectacular, it has to be said. That being said, it's not entirely new. The section from Stanmore to Baker Street dates from the 1930s, and from Baker Street to Green Park from the 1970s. So it's kind of a mishmash of styles. Next up, the Victoria line. The 2nd newest, the line with the most frequent service. It's also a line that's very hot and whose stations were designed at a time when London Transport were trying to spend as little money as possible. They are therefore not always the best in terms of crowd flow and ventilation. But it offers a fast, direct service across central London and connects several places that have otherwise been ignored by the tube. At number 9 is the District line. The rolling stock is quite modern, being the S stock introduced in the early 2010s. That being said, the service has its flaws, the most obvious being the fact that at its western end it splays off in several different directions. While there are lots of trains on the line as a whole, it's by no means guaranteed that the particular station you want is getting a train anytime soon. The District is also one of the subsurface lines, and the problem with those is that they share a lot of track. That means that the problems on one line can have a knock-on effect for all the others. The other subsurface lines are the Hammersmith and City, the Circle, and the Metropolitan. Oh, would you look at that, the Metropolitan is next. Now, the Metropolitan has many of the same pluses and minuses as the District. Very similar rolling stock, many different branches. It also goes the furthest out from London, with Chesham Station being 25 miles from central London. Its trains have more of a mainline feel to them. Once you get out of central London, the stations are a long distance apart, and the trains get up a bit of speed. All that being said, I'm not surprised to see that it occupies a similar position to the District. The lines are similar. Speaking of, the next up is the Hammersmith and City line, which for a long time was considered part of the Metropolitan line. This runs from Barking in East London to Hammersmith in West London. I never really have much to say about this line, I fear. Personally, I quite like it. I think the stations it has in the west are very characterful. Hammersmith itself is gorgeous. And it may come as no surprise whatsoever to learn that the next line is the Circle. Now, the Circle is an odd one because it's not really a line at all. In fact, since 2009, it's had a little branch out to Hammersmith, so it's not a circle either. In general, it lacks an identity of its own. Its track in the south is part of the District Line, in the north it's part of the Metropolitan Line, and the branch out to Hammersmith is part of the Hammersmith and City Line. Again, it uses S stock. I'm not surprised it polled lower than the others, because there's not much it does that other lines don't also do. As a matter of fact, until the 1940s it wasn't even treated as a separate line. It was considered to be part of the Metropolitan and District lines. I suspect there may also be an element of frustration in the polling. Anyone who's waited for a particular Metropolitan or District train is no doubt familiar with the irritation of a Circle train showing up instead. Now we're into our top 5, or bottom 5, depending how you count these things. The Piccadilly Line. The Piccadilly Line is the 5th most hated and 4th busiest, and the two may be connected. It has the 2nd oldest rolling stock on the entire network, and indeed in public service anywhere in the UK, in the form of the 1973 stock. The old stock affects reliability of service. In fact, just a month before the poll was published, there was a shortage of trains caused by damage inflicted by leaves on the line. And if you're in the west, it's often crowded from the very start of the journey thanks to Heathrow Airport. Next is the Waterloo and City Line, the weirdest line on the tube. It consists of only 2 stations about 3 minutes journey apart, Waterloo and Bank. It's closed at weekends, it is incredibly busy during rush hour, but it's pretty quiet the rest of the time. The most common complaint I hear about it is that it's pointless. Although admittedly that tends to be from people who don't regularly use it. Personally, I disagree. Oh, and also, it smells funny. And next, Saints preserve us, it's the Bakerloo. Well, I explained the reasons this line is unpopular. It tends to be low priority for upgrades, being one of the less used lines in terms of passenger numbers. And of course this impacts the service. The trains it has are the oldest on the tube, and thus the oldest in public service in the UK. They are prone to breaking down. Many of the stations look quite shabby. Well, it's not the least popular, but it's no surprise to see it down here. The second least liked line on the tube is the Northern Line. Well, that's no surprise at all. The Northern Line is frankly a mess. It splays into 2 in central London, comes together at Camden Town, then splays out again. Plus it has a couple of stubby little branches to Battersea and Mill Hill East. With all that going on, it's no wonder that the service goes wrong sometimes. It's never quite shaken off the nickname of the Misery Line that it had in the 80s, when it was badly lacking in investment. So that leaves one. The worst line on the tube, or the least loved at any rate, is the Central Line. The Central Line's got it all. It's hot, it's overcrowded, the stock is old and keeps breaking down, it has a bunch of branches. About the only flaw it doesn't have is that it doesn't share any track with other lines. Honestly, before I'd even read the poll, I figured it was either going to be the Central Line or the Northern Line in the bottom spot. That being said, £500 million is being invested into overhauling the trains, so things may improve. We'll have to come back and see where people's opinions stand next year. So there's your answer. The most hated line is the Central Line. There are many factors that go into making a service unlikable. Poor reliability, low quality rolling stock, an uncomfortable ride, an infrequent service. But it seems that there's one line in particular that has people seeing red. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Let me know what your least favourite tube line is in the comments. Do you agree with the poll, or do you think some of the lines have been unfairly mal-lined? Let's get a discussion going. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the investment to my unpopular line. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.